Is there something wrong with our work culture? Why are so many people disengaged at their jobs? And what is being done about it? Here, we discuss the process of matching jobs with employees and what each side should be looking for. We go through the importance of leadership in managers and how they affect the overall culture of the company and how important that is to the employees. Hint, soft skills really matter here. Introduce yourself and talk a little bit about your expertise and your research.
Yeah, my name is Talya Bauer. I'm the Cameron Professor of Management at Portland State University. I've done a lot of work in terms of research and teaching and consulting and working with organizations. I think my specialties are really around relationships at work, and that shows up in the human resource domain. It shows up in the management domain, organizational behavior, leadership, and really following employees through that whole employee life cycle, kind of from the time that they're thinking about joining an organization and out there in the potential applicant pool till when they're departing and maybe even to the point of retiring. And so there's just a lot of things that I've studied over the last 30 years under that umbrella. But when I kind of get back down to it, those are some of the themes. It's been kind of looking at from the employee's perspective, thinking about kind of things holistically and how it's not just recruitment, it's recruitment and onboarding. It's not just recruitment and onboarding, it's also leadership and how they're treated by people on the inside and how newcomers are going to then turn around and impact the culture. So not every study is able to do that, but over the course of my work, that's more and more what I'm trying to do.
So my premise, sort of the reason I wanted to find somebody like you to talk to is I've been seeing in the news things like worker dissatisfaction, there's record turnover, low engagement, things like this at work. And then on the other side, you see articles where companies, they can't find enough skilled workers for their jobs. So that's really just, I see these two sides, and to me it seems like there's a mismatch here. Yeah, so that's my first question really is just explain to me the problem as you see it.
Yeah, I mean, obviously these are big, meaty questions. We're probably not going to solve it all here today in this afternoon of discussion. But there are a lot of things going on. So I think that the statistics you're talking about are correct, that, they're from reputable sources, looking at Bureau of Labor Statistics and thinking about what they're saying, looking at Gallup and some of those engagement scores. They are lower than they have ever been. It's interesting to map them. We all I think not everyone, but so many people think remote would be just the ideal job, never have to go in and be out on my own. Those are the people who are the least engaged. And so, that's kind of record low down there at 28%. But then on the other hand, being on site doesn't seem to be the magic panacea. They're still sitting at kind of a low 33%. Again, this is Gallup's 2023 data. But I think that there's all these opportunities for a new configuration with hybrid. And so that's at 35%. So, you're going up quite a bit and giving people flexibility without giving them the ability to kind of almost check out as a team player in the organization. So those are for the people who have jobs. And then implicit in what you're saying is also, all those people with great skills looking for great jobs, people are complaining they can't find them. How do we match that up? And there's so many layers. We could probably do a seminar for 10 weeks and not even uncover all the issues. But, really, if you think about what it takes for organizations to understand what they're going to need in the future, is they need to have some clarity and some stability. And we've had very little of any of that, right? Everything seems to be changing. You've got COVID and all the issues were going there kind of woke a sleeping giant. There was a lot of dissatisfaction that people probably weren't even aware of. So, when you're going through and you're doing your routine and you're doing the same thing every day, you have less time to think about, is this really fulfilling? Do I really love this job? And there's a lot of just inertia that came from the COVID days, right? So people started saying, I don't really want to do this. I'm not getting enough out of this job to make this worthwhile. I know people personally, as well as write-ups in articles, who quit with no other options, right? They just rather do nothing and explore some of their passions than keep doing what they were doing. There were people who thought the grass might be greener, and so they went to different geographies, different countries, different industries, different organizations. So there's a lot of different personal choices that go on there. People who wanted remote. When remote went away, they were willing to walk away from a job to get that remote. But the grass isn't always greener. So we know that, a good number of the 47 million who quit during 2021 to 2022, I don't know the exact percentages, but are what are known as boomerang employees. So they went back to their employers. So that is not unheard of. I've studied that to some degree, and it's kind of at a record level. So people are doing that more. You don't see a lot of write-ups about that. But some people said, yeah, I went over and I was at this other place and they paid me a little bit more, but actually I didn't feel as supported by my colleagues. I didn't like the rest of the job. So that's something that I think I don't hear enough about. I see articles here and there, but the theme seems to be, everything's broken. And I think a lot of things are broken. So organizations are looking at kind of pipelines, right? They're trying to forecast what they're going to need. They're trying to understand what kind of skills they're going to need, who they're going to need, how many and where, and kind of all of those questions are unclear right now. We've got artificial intelligence, so we don't even know what jobs are going to look like 2 years, more or less 10 years from now, which is what a lot of these pipelines are projecting, right? They're trying to figure out who's going to be the CEO in 25 years and kind of going backwards down the organization. And so, that's a big question mark. What skills do we only care about skills? So there's kind of a push to, well, if you're certified and you have these skills, but we don't just hire people in organizations for simply their skills. We also, are hiring them based for their experience, for their ability to work together, for their creativity, and for their attitudes. I think that a big part of what we talk about consciously and objectively is people's attitudes and their attitude toward work, how they come, how they present themselves. And so those are things that, you could have 5 people with the same skills, but you give me somebody with the right attitude and, they're going to surpass and quite a bit fly over those other people just by showing up and doing the work and being good humored and open to working with others. So there's all sorts of things going on there. And I don't have the solution. I mean, it feels like a big dating app to me right now, right? You've got these people and they're saying, this is what I've got to offer. This is what I'm interested in. And they're trying to find each other. And it doesn't really seem to be working. I don't know that the resume is the best way to do that. I know from personal experience trying to even help friends with this, that it's just not that easy to navigate. It seems like it. There's all these different places you can go to and look for jobs and put in your characteristics, but it's pretty tough to find the matching. And I think the old adage that 80%, 90%, 95% of jobs are never listed is probably still very true, that people don't actually tend to go through that formal process of posting jobs for most positions. A lot of times things are created with people in mind or internal hires in mind or shifting of things. But knowing someone, networking is kind of invaluable, and it's gotten harder and harder to do as we're staying in our home offices. So again, I think that's part of that engagement. Are you engaged in your professional organizations? Are you networking with other people in your area? Are you kind of going, we call it the loose ties? Are you connecting with people that you know a little bit? You know who you know already, right? You kind of have a shared knowledge and network base. But if you go out from there, you're going to find more and more people. So that's really the applicant side. And then the organization side, I think there's a huge opportunity here to redo things and do things differently. But I haven't seen a lot of organizations who have yet cracked this code. And the days where you can just, ramp up and hire thousands of people and then let them go and there's no consequence, I think that whiplash kind of has burnt people quite a bit too. And we see union pushes, unionization going on now at greater numbers belong to unions than ever before. But the percentage of people in America who are union members is the smallest it's ever been. And that's been true for year after year after year for quite a while. So it sounds like, if we just unionize, that would be the answer. And we could, we can get this and we can get that. But it's, to me, I guess, and maybe it's a little bit not naive, but wishful thinking, is I think that when things are in balance, right? If you have an over surplus of skills and demands, over surplus of jobs, either of those is going to be a problem for the market, right? The market really wants there to be, kind of equanimity between the two. And so to the degree that there's kind of a good number of people out there to do things that you need, the better. And then the other thing is, whose job is it to make sure these people have the skills? So if you think about nurses, if you think about big animal vets, if you think about water treatment operators. There are not enough of them in the pipeline. There are not enough people going into this. Is it truly just the people who would hire those individuals job, or is there some kind of vetting that we can do to kind of throttle up and throttle down? The Bureau of Labor Statistics does some job forecasting. They do a decent job, but it's really very passive, right? It's descriptive. It's based on what they've seen recently and projecting out. But there isn't any master plan where people are going around and doing more than, kind of, there's a research article on something. And so then people say, oh, water treatment operators, they get paid a lot. It doesn't demand a lot of education. It's really meaningful and important. You get to be outside. You have a lot of autonomy. But it's not a thing that most kids in high school think that's what I want to grow up to be. So there's all sorts of opportunities there, I think, for the entrepreneurial individual, but it is really like so many people want to get into certain things because I think that'll be the it item. And you got to wonder with AI, how many of those things will be around 10 years from now. Water treatment plants, I think, are still going to be in need of operators. Nurses, I think, you might have great AI that's assisting, but ultimately you're going to want an individual there, physically as well. So I think kind of thinking through that, huge challenges and huge opportunities. So I'm curious to see how it all plays out, but I certainly don't have all the answers.
So is there an important distinction between skilled jobs, unskilled jobs, or I guess, do we need to distinguish the market for those different sectors? Do these forces that you were just talking about, do they apply kind of separately to these different groups of people, or how do we think about, the skilled workers versus unskilled?
Yeah, there's a lot there. I think to a great degree, our community colleges in the United States do a pretty decent job of helping people who want to be mechanics, who want to go into be electricians. I think there's a lot of things there. The kind of more blue collar trades are definitely kind of a different animal because there's more of a path there. But obviously, people depend on if they want to work for someone else, they want to start their own firm, they're in a family business. So there's differences there. Size of the organization, if you're talking about 200,000 person multinational versus a local mom and pop store, there's going to be big differences there. Mid-sized businesses, most businesses in America are kind of small and medium size. If you think about the numbers of them out there and people who are employed. So there are big differences. I think a lot of what I talked about in general has a pull through across those, but there's a lot of nuances. So I study new employees, and in general, my research would say it takes about a year, thinking about someone being new until they fully master kind of the work, the expectations, and the social dimensions of their job, understanding the politics and the culture. That's across everybody. But then you have, say a retail sales associate and the turnover rate is 200 or 300%. If you can keep them there for 60 days instead of 50 days, you're winning. So there's a different calculus to that. You're not going to spend 90 days onboarding someone who'll be gone in 50. And then on the other side, NASA has used some of my work, and they don't want to talk about a year for an astronaut. They're talking about a lot of years, maybe, 5, 6, 7 years before they would say that person is done being onboarded and truly understanding the job. So lots of nuances to think about. So, there's a lot of interesting pieces in the nuances as well.
And then how interchangeable are some of those skills? So like when you're talking about nurses or some of the medical stuff, it's a very specific skill that you need to absolutely know how to do like these specific things. And if you know it though, you're probably going to be able to do your job. Whereas probably a lot of other jobs are more, I guess you would call soft skills, more social skills, things like that, where the skills aren't necessarily as defined, what it takes to be good at the job.
Well, I live in the world of soft skills. If you were going to kind of put where my world is, I definitely am doing the AI and the data analysis, but really it's thinking about interpersonal relationships at work. And so there's a lot of soft skills there. But you use nurses or doctors as an example, but actually what we find in terms of lawsuits filed against them for malpractice is having those soft skills can be night and day in terms of the percentages of people who are sued malpractice issues. So same event might happen, but how it's handled, right?
I've
So
heard that.
one is a very technical thing, but there's the communication, there's the empathy, there's all of those sorts of things, and the way they present themselves, how open they are, that can make a huge factor difference, for that hospital, obviously, and then the individuals. So, if you're really good at finance and investing, what's going to happen to you in 5 to 10 years as an individual contributor is you're going to be promoted to be a manager and manage other people. So even if you don't come out right away as somebody who's going to manage other people, I think we quickly slot people into that area if they're good at their job, which is kind of ironic, right? We don't often give them the support or training for that, but we assume because they're good engineers or because they're good at finance, they must be good at leading other people in those jobs. So we look at the
Hmm.
skill part, but not the soft skills part.
Hmm.
Even
Yeah.
pretty big organizations fall prey to that.
Yeah, yeah. I want to get to that after. I want to talk about the selection process first because we're talking about soft skills don't really come up on a resume. And I guess, as you were saying, I guess not actually most people don't get hired based on the resume. They do get hired based on some personal connection. But when we're talking about fitting and how people are match to their job and how well they can do their job and all these things. How good are most companies at that selection process? You mentioned one thing that was sort of an undervalued skill that people have. Are there more things that you think are maybe overvalued versus undervalued when we're evaluating new people that we hire?
Yeah. Well, in the States, we tend to really value people who come across as confident, competent. We conflate competence with confidence. And so if somebody's extroverted, if, they're able to present themselves well, we tend to have this positive halo. They must be good at everything. The research doesn't necessarily bear that out because, as you might imagine, that's everyone who's extroverted, and it doesn't really say anything about their skill set. So more introverted people can definitely be great thinkers. They can be great, have a lot to contribute, but it's just packaged a little bit differently. So the research is really clear that interviews can be really effective, but not the shooting from the hip. I'm just going to shoot the breeze with you. What works really well is having structured interviews. So everybody's asked the exact same questions, a panel. So multiple people are rating against the criteria that was established. And when you kind of have the discipline to do those things, that leads to much better outcomes, in terms of what you're looking for. And then it's up to the organization to say, do they think that it's important, some of these soft skills, or that there are examples of where they've demonstrated leadership or dealt with conflict. And so there's a lot of situational interview questions you can ask to get at those. And that's what I'm always looking at when I'm interviewing somebody. Have they engaged in things or situations demonstrating skills that I think are going to be needed in this job? I've also done work with organizations who are doing initial interviews. AI is scoring those interviews. You just record, upload, they get scored. There may be bias built in, but it's not human bias directly. And again, that's a filtering, funneling process. That's not making final decisions, but thousands of people apply, and so which hundreds are going to get through might be scored by AI based on what people are saying.
It's just a tool, and you can use it well or you can use it poorly, right? And I was
But
wondering
what was
too.
interesting about that research actually was I expected that people wouldn't be open to it, that they would feel like it was kind of a cold thing having a computer score them. They actually found it, this is during COVID, so that might have been part of it, but they really appreciated that approach and the flexibility. So that was interesting. And the ability, in this particular instance, the organization allowed them to record multiple and just submit the one that they wanted to. And so they really liked that quite a bit.
Mhm. And I was wondering, so a lot of if you're looking at a job description posting, they'll have pretty specific requirements, things that they're looking for. Because I feel like that's there people look for one really specific, like, or like a few really specific things that they focus on, and it's just like they're not the most critical things for the job. It's just that we need something concrete to, hone in on.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right. I mean, there are some that are better than others. discrimination is bad. Discriminating is what we're trying to do, right? We're trying to discriminate from someone who can do this job well from someone who can't, right? That's the good kind of discriminate. But discrimination, can be illegal, unethical, all of those things. So I think one of the things is that discipline is, required by law, that you have criteria, that you show what those are. So we avoid that bad kind of discrimination, right? This idea
Okay.
that, we can't consider you unless you have these things, but if you're in that universe, then you will be considered. So I think that first pass is where that comes from. Now, what those criteria are, I think, was a key part of what you were asking. And so, I think sometimes organizations just get in habits of saying the same thing they've said last time, and not really thinking about the job. But it's not glamorous work, but going back, doing a job analysis, really understanding what it takes to be good at this job. But again, there's a lot of things in flux. And so, at Google, they're not even hiring for jobs. There aren't job descriptions. So it's kind of good for Google. And then you don't even know what job you might be placed in until you get there. At least that was the case when I was there. And so that's a new way of thinking about things altogether, right? So there you're thinking about what kind of person are you, how smart, how flexible, how creative, what kind of skills have you done, what experiences you had. It's a different animal altogether in a way than thinking about a specific job. But I think in some ways it was pretty insightful because jobs will evolve and people don't stay in the same job for their whole careers normally. So
To go with the diversity sort of line, I imagine for a lot of jobs, you do want just a diverse background. You have a job description, maybe you have a bunch of people doing this job, but you don't want one kind of person doing that job, right? You probably want a bunch of different people, especially on more creative jobs where you're just innovating. I'm sure that's a valuable thing, right?
yeah, oh, absolutely. And I mean, even I've got research looking at retail employees selling clothes, and people who have kind of more skills, even though they're not directly related to that, tend to sell more. I mean, there's kind of, this kind of general truism that people who have kind of higher cognitive ability tend to be better at most jobs. So even though we wouldn't think of that as a job that would require a lot of creativity, I think clearly something is driving that difference. And, it might be the creative way in which they approach people or think about sales strategies, that sort of thing. So, yeah, I think you're right.
This is kind of a general question, but like, how much time, effort do companies spend evaluating performance, and how do they do that in softer skills? And because these are all hard to quantify, but like also important and not obvious from just looking at data. So I was wondering, like you've worked at a few companies, but I wonder what your impression is of how good companies are at managing people and getting the most out of them, basically.
Yeah, no, it's an interesting, important question. Again, really changing what we had always been done seemed a little broken. So, historically, there was the annual performance appraisal, and we'd have to try and remember everything that happened in the last year. That goes kind of against all the best practices, what we know about, people's performance and feedback and relationships. And so, now it's a lot more about one-on-ones, and we see that more often. People have more frequent one-on-ones, and then those once a year formal things have become less and less critical. But on the other hand, we're still trying to decide who to promote and who to move around. Big organizations like the Microsofts, the Googles, the IBMs, they're going to have internal almost job fairs, right? They're going to be talking about other jobs where people can have the opportunity to move around. There's a lot of strategies around, looking for all sorts of different people. And so it depends on how large the organization is. If you're at a startup, obviously you get to kind of get your hands on anything, and the job is expanding daily, weekly, monthly. And so there's a lot of opportunities, and people can learn a lot in a short amount of time there. So there's kind of pros and cons to big organizations or smaller organizations, and how much room there is for you to really kind of put your fingerprint on things.
Well put. What are some of the costs of choosing the wrong person for the job? Somebody who either doesn't fit well, or somebody who's not going to be happy and quits? Because I've heard like the process of onboarding, and then as well as the training and all these things, can be many times even just the salary of the person. So it's a really important thing, right?
Exactly. No, it is. So, obviously it depends on the estimate, but there's a lot of money involved in that. There's the opportunity cost because the work isn't getting done. There's a morale cost when people
Mhm.
don't work out within. And then there's a culture. I think the worst is they're a bad hire and they stay, right? I mean, turnover is not the worst outcome there. That would be great compared to them staying, having a bad attitude. Kind of, you bring enough people in, and eventually the culture is going to shift. Into something else compared to what it was. And so I think it's really something to look to and think about because at 1% at a time, it doesn't seem like much, but it really adds up to that becomes your culture. Is it something where people are passionate, engaged, or is it kind of, what's in it for me? And I'm going to do the minimum and, kind of coast here.
Okay. Do you see any other of these sort of macro trends or events that you think had a shift in the culture or changed things, based on 10 years ago or whatever?
I mean, in ways I can't predict, AI is here, it's here to stay, and it's gonna be dramatic, I think. You look at AI pictures now and you can kind of tell still, but how long until there's video that, you and I aren't standing here or sitting here, but it's just a transcript and they're able to generate us from enough still images. I don't think we're very far off from that, actually. And so what does that mean? What value are we bringing? And I would say still a lot, right, in terms of critical thinking and judgment and the human condition. But in terms of the routine things, I think there's going to be a lot less available for them. And so if so many of the jobs are routine, I could imagine it could be quite a wake-up call rippling across the economy.
Mhm. Yeah, I could see that. And automation, of course, just general robots and things like that for
I mean, I'm old enough that
manufacturing
I
jobs.
remember, when cars and robots, was going to be the end of the world as we knew it because, all those great paying car jobs were going away. I do think something else will replace it. I do think we will evolve, but there will be winners and losers, like there always have been throughout history, right? So you go through, they had huge problems in New York City. They were having meetings around the world, around the country, trying to deal with the massive problem that was they had acres and acres of horse refuge from all the horses and carriages, right? So the streets were full and they would plow it and they would put it all, and it was starting to be like 2 stories, 3 stories. What were they going to do? And, what was the solution? Well, once cars came in, that problem kind of solved itself, right? So they thought they needed to solve the problem of the waste from the horses, but they actually didn't because there weren't any horses anymore eventually. So I
Right.
think we're facing some of those kind of things that we just can't even imagine. We're really worried about problem X, but that's not going to be the problem that we have to worry about.
Yeah, it's hard to predict. Are there any that you've seen that so that the long past one, is there one in the past just couple decades that you see shifted the workforce
Well,
dramatically?
I mean, the one that's kind of, closest to my day job, I think, for a long time, everybody said, hey, college education, look at these numbers. If you go to college, you're going to make more money, you're going to be happier, you're going to have all these great outcomes. And everybody needed to get a college degree. And I don't think that was ever probably true, but it really kind of became a mantra, an assumption that, everyone should be pushed into higher ed. And we weren't emphasizing as much, I don't think, the associate's degrees, the kind of more technical degrees for people in high schools and in colleges. So I think that was one. Now I think we swung too far the other way. And so now are people, oh, why do we really need college? Because, you can just take a Google course or watch a YouTube video and learn everything you need to learn.
Yeah.
And yes, just-in-time learning is amazing. And I go to YouTube videos when I need to figure something out about how to fix my car or how to fix my fence. But there is a critical thinking, there's an access to knowledge, there's an awareness of kind of where things are, that is, I think, so uniquely human and special. And it makes me sad that it's kind of like the baby's being thrown out with the bathwater. I think there's definitely kind of a balance between the two. And so we just started a degree soon that just got approved and will be working its way through the final approvals. But people who have those kind of technical degrees, if they want to come back to school and get a college degree in management. So like we've created a pathway for that. It's kind of a bridge between the two. So if you were a nurse and you've decided that that's not what you want to continue to do, but you've got this 2-year degree in nursing, you could go ahead and use that for your first 2 years of college, and then we would add that on, the business expertise, and just kind of help people pivot there as needed. So I think we need to be thinking more and more about meeting people where they are, and thinking really about, I keep saying it, but it's really true. There's all these challenges, and in every challenge is an opportunity. And if we're just afraid of the challenge or just see the negatives of the challenge, it's really hard to be creative and generative and think about the opportunities. And it's also really easy to be myopic and say the problem right now is, we have a nursing shortage, so we have to do X, Y, Z instead of kind of looking at the bigger issue. So I think there's lots of ways to tackle this, but if we all kind of are deer in headlights, not much is going to get done.
So there is still a huge disparity, though, between outcomes of educated people versus uneducated people, right? Though.
Absolutely. And so is that because, what is the driver there? Is it because people who are kind of getting a diverse, liberal arts education and taking all those different kinds of classes learn to think more critically, more creatively, more expansively, are better consumers of knowledge? Or is it simply because organizations pay them more because they have the college degree, right? And so we don't really know. I think it might be a very unfortunate experiment if we kind of ratchet it down to just the elites go to college. But at the same time, I think we need much more firm, in Germany and France, there are apprentices, there's systems that go on for, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years, to help you be an amazing bricklayer or an electrician. And I think kind of mainstreaming those throughout high school, those vocational interests that people might have, and kind of building that in to be different but equal to college degrees, right? Could we do that? Plus also have some other kind of more general writing skills and math skills and thinking and reading skills. I know if I had to pick one of the top 10 things that it helps people to be happy, it's like read some nonfiction or fiction, read a book. It's a lost art. People don't read anymore.
Mhm.
People don't read textbooks. People don't read books for pleasure. But everyone I know who picks up a book and starts reading seems to be happier than the person who doesn't.
At the
And
very least, you're, lowering your ADD for a little bit and focusing on something for longer.
focusing on something and getting out of your own head and into somebody else's experience. It has, all these amazing things. Empathy, trying on different, times, locations of science fiction, different worlds. It's just very expansive. And I think it's really easy to say all that matters is making money and having skills, right? And that is not much of an existence really, but yet when I go and I read a book, even though you wouldn't think at all it would inform anything, it often will open up, I've been dealing or wrestling with these challenges in a research paper or a question or something about our curriculum, and then I'll go and read a different book and it just kind of changes something in my brain that opens it right up. I had a friend in graduate school, and he used to say, I know how to make my muse work, and I read. And he would read and read and read until the idea came to him. So that's also, I think, a big thing that generationally we should be advocating more. Dolly Parton gives all those free books to little kids, but I think starting early and just keeping it going, and not making them so busy that they don't have time in school to read for pleasure, and just counting it and giving them brownie points because they read a book, it really should be for its own pleasure, I think.
Back to education for a sec. Yeah, I have this kind of biased perspective where it's really just a way of filtering people for the job market. At least education now, it seems to be more about evaluating people and putting people through a process rather than teaching them. But I don't know.
And it really depends, but yeah, there's a certain amount of it. But if you're an employer, it does indicate some things, right? There's like you showed up, you were able to, go through kind of a Byzantine red tape. You were able to, I'm assuming there's some social skills there that you were able to be in a classroom, you were able to interact with other people, work in teams. So there's a lot of assumptions that are going on through there. I think probably we could have fewer credits. I think we could, do it with fewer, and let people kind of specialize earlier. I think it's very easy to add one more thing, and not take something away. So I think that will be, the opportunity for those in higher education is how do we really decide what it is that we want to say, this is what a college education means, and this is what this person has done, while also giving people pathways and flexibility in there, to kind of be themselves and feel like they're making themselves better rather than being beaten down by the process.
I'm going to shift to sort of like the worker perspective now. So like people who are out looking for jobs, we're looking at employers looking for workers. Now I want to be an employee going out searching for a job, something that matches my skill set, something that's interesting. So like what kind of things do we know that people tend to value in their job?
Yeah, there's a classic job characteristics model. I've summarized the literature on life satisfaction. So we kind of know what those characteristics are. Again, this isn't to say for you or for me, but in general, people really like meaning in their job, right? They like feeling like their task has significance. They like feeling like they have autonomy, right? Agency. So empowering people is something that's going to be really important. What else do people love? Feedback. They don't want negative feedback, that's for sure, but coaxing and kind of getting people. I think I read somewhere that an airplane is only exactly on target of the line from A to B, like 2% of the time. They're always kind of a little bit left, a little bit to the right, and kind of shifting back and forth. That's the kind of feedback people love. They don't necessarily always want to just be getting positive feedback, but how can I improve? Are you actually watching what I'm doing enough to know how to help make me better? So I think we're going to see that. I think that's always been true, and I think we're going to see it more and more because I think the younger generation is used to these things and they're going to demand it really. But it's hard because you don't, the best thing in the world is a proactive employee, but the worst thing in the world is someone who's proactive in the wrong direction, right? So you want to make sure you're getting people in the right spots with the right skills and the right mindset before you turn them loose. So,
Okay.
so it's a balancing act. But for employees, I think being proactive is a huge one, and really preparing yourself. It's a very predictable process. So if you went to college, every college has a career center, and they will record you. They'll do practice interviews. They'll look over your resume. They'll help you with cover letters, help you do company research. They have career fairs. We do a lot for alumni. So it's a huge resource, and I'm always amazed at how few students as a percentage use it. And then they say, wow, that was amazing. I didn't know.
Oh,
Who knew? And I'm like, I've been saying it forever. But there's also a lot of free online resources. There's, now AI will give you feedback on your resume. So there are a lot of things that people can do, keeping your LinkedIn up to date. Really, I'm talking a lot about kind of white collar jobs probably, but I think it's kind of true for everybody. Just having a presence out there and not an off-putting presence, right? So, LinkedIn is probably not the place for a lot of activism. You do you if that's what you want to do, but being as it's people you don't know, that I don't know how much you're going to persuade them versus not. Whereas Facebook is kind of your personal thing, you doing it there, but LinkedIn is really set up for kind of career networking.
mhm.
So I think kind of using the different social medias for their intended purpose can be powerful. And norms shift, things shift. I mean, the conventional wisdom forever was that, if you had a tattoo, you wanted to cover it up. That's probably still true at some firms in some states in some regions. But many of my students will say, oh, well, but the person interviewing me had 12 tattoos. I only have 11. And so it actually becomes a benefit because there's similarity, attraction, and you're kind of, something you can relate to for one another. So, there's some of those superficial things that I think were best practices that need to be taken with a grain of salt as they evolve. But there's other things like being prepared. Someone's always going to ask you, tell me why you applied for this job. Tell me a bit about yourself. Of course, you're going to practice those answers, but I'm surprised how many people don't. And then kind of telling your story in a succinct way. So what's an example of a leadership situation? What's an example of dealing with a difficult coworker? What's an example of a time that you were able to take something that was a challenge and turn it into an opportunity? And those should all be prepared. And there's lots of opportunities and resources out there to how to package those. But I'm a big
Yeah, they
fan of
feel
this.
cliched, but
They
it's
do,
useful.
but it's a formula and everybody's using it. So if you're not using it, you're really at a disadvantage.
Mhm.
And I think the key is to be authentic. Why pretend to be somebody else that you're not and get a job where you have to pretend to not be you? So I think people can take it too far, but I think in general, being yourself and just putting it in a package that's digestible, in a few minute answers is definitely powerful. Night and day, actually, when people do it and when they don't. I record people before and they come in and they answer a question and then afterwards, and it really is night and day. They're the same person. It's just a little bit of polish.
Hmm. Do you know how often people lie on resumes or interviews, things like that? Is that a
I
common
mean,
thing?
it seems like I have read statistics. I don't know universally. I never recommend it because it's pretty easy to get caught, right? So,
Okay.
as people ask those probing questions, if you don't really know, or especially if they're really interested. So my husband swam in the Olympics, and he has that at the very bottom, kind of sports and honors, and he's never been to an interview where that's not what they wanted to talk about. So if he had
Okay.
not really gone to the Olympics as a swimmer, it would be very difficult, right, to have this come up over and over again and lie about it for the rest of your life. Um, so sometimes something that you think, oh, nobody will notice, well, they might, right? So I think
Okay.
it's important to do that. Same thing about exaggerating, right? It's really easy to be vague and it sounds good, but most people are pretty savvy. So if you're saying that, I was involved with, a project that saved $50 million, but you don't have any specifics to talk about, I don't think you were very involved. I think,
Mhm. Yeah, I think that's probably true for most people. And then you see some exceptional cases of high profile people who just lied their way up there, and it's like it's kind of
absolutely.
amazing. Okay, I want to talk about sort of dive into each one of those a little bit of the characteristics that I found here. So autonomy is important to a lot of people, just to feel like they're in control of something, right? They don't want to be just, at the end of the whip. So how do you get that basically in your job? What kind of jobs do that? And I suspect that a lot of people have the idea that as they get promoted, as they become more managerial, that they'll gain more autonomy. But I don't
It's
think that's
not
the
true. It's
case
the
here.
opposite, right? The only way to be free of people is not to manage people. So managing them actually makes them very interconnected to you in all sorts of ways that you cannot disentangle, versus being an individual contributor. I'll say it from the flip side. I guess as a manager, and when I'm hiring people, managing people, and also when I'm talking to organizations about how to do it right, it's pretty simple formula, but it's very hard to execute. I try and hire people, I call it grown-ups. I try and hire grown-ups,
Mhm.
and I try and, train them up so they know what I'm expecting of them, what I need them to do, and then get out of their way. So I'm looking to empower and support them, and every once in a while I'll need to go in and say, okay, we're all going to add this assignment, or we're all going to, have to come together to work on this deliverable. But in general, because they've had so much autonomy, I don't get resistance to those things. And that, I'm explaining why it's an issue. So I think that there's some of that. It's also what you put back out in the world, right? So as individuals, if you really want to have a lot of autonomy, then treating your coworkers with a lot of autonomy, and treating them with respect is going to go a long way too, because it's a culture, right? So to the degree that you micromanage people, they are going to think that that's what good managers do. I must micromanage you as well. So I don't have the silver
Mhm.
bullet, but I do think it's kind of an approach. It's much easier, right, to not micromanage.
So I found the stat, it probably varies from place to place, but 88% of people prioritize their career development as something they look for in their job. So they don't like the feeling of just being stuck doing the same thing, right?
Yeah, I
Okay.
don't know if it's 88%, but it's all a push, right? Everybody cares about salary until you have enough salary. And then it starts to
Okay.
be, what would I push here? What would I give to be remote? What would I give to, but development is huge. So I think that, it's kind of like the feedback in a way, right? You're looking to develop new skills, new areas, growth potential. I think people don't want to stagnate. I think there was a little bit of an existential reevaluation that happened during COVID. It's like, if we all might not be here, 2 years from now, how would I feel if this is what I had done with my life? And so people wanted to do more. And if you don't feel like you have that meaning, it's hard to get excited about going to work every day.
Uh-huh. Yeah, yeah. And then how easy or how often do people find it that they can capitalize on new skills that they learn? Like how often do people advance? You think of like a sort of a pyramid shape at most companies, right? If you want to do something that requires more skills, well, there's only fewer and fewer people who can do it. So like if everyone's learning new jobs, new skills, do you actually get to capitalize on that, or is that kind of just a rare thing?
It really depends on where you are. I mean, there's some organizations where you can't really be promoted until you're basically doing that job.
Okay.
so that's the way you get promoted. It's a political process by definition, right? The more people want it, then can have it. People often will kind of job hop to go somewhere else so that they can get that experience, get that additional pay, get that additional promotion. And so there are a lot of ways people can do it. But yeah, I would say that is kind of one of the big problems with all of it, right? We have a big bottom and very small top, and those are disproportionate rewards as well.
Yeah. Yeah. So I guess I was wondering what you think about using promotion as an incentive for people to work. Does that make sense or
I mean, it is a thing and it's a real thing. But I think it's a recipe for unhappiness if that's the only reason you're going to work, right?
okay.
So I think, kind of holding out for someday when and then everything will be great is not a good strategy, kind of no matter what you're thinking about or holding out for. I think it's kind of finding, I don't know, it sounds very Pollyanna-ish, but finding the joy in every day. But those moments of joy, the research on life satisfaction is just so clear. It being satisfied has nothing to do with how much you make after you make enough to be, have a living, safe living space where you're secure, which is really critical. But after that, it's about your approach, your outlook on life. It's about noticing, smelling the roses, reading a book, smiling when people walk by. Those are the kinds of things that make your life qualitatively different than somebody who doesn't have those. So you can be married and be really happy, have kids and be really happy, but you could also be married and have kids and be really unhappy. And so that's not the thing that predicts. What predicts is how you are in that marriage and as a parent, and your other relationships. So I don't know if it's a happy, I think it's happy because I kind of think that knowing that it's within your sphere of influence to impact that, it's kind of all in your head, how you look at things. That to me is kind of powerful. Now, it doesn't mean there aren't incredibly horrible things that happen, and really toxic, unhealthy situations that people should just get out of. It doesn't mean you should put up with those at all. So I'm kind of assuming none of that is happening. And then once you have a stable environment, how are you looking at things? But clearly you should not be smelling the roses if somebody's being abusive to you at work, or you're being discriminated against, or harassed, those sorts of things. But I think for a lot of people, it is just about their approach once those things are kind of taken care of.
Okay. That's sort of a personal perspective, but then there's like a general culture around it, right? And definitely see in so many places that there's like this feeling of just like a rat race where you're just competing and you're just trying to take whatever you can get for yourself, right? And that
Yeah.
seems like a really toxic thing. I don't know if that's changed, the culture has changed, or if it's always been like that, but I think a lot of people are feeling that now, and they're just trying to get in and get out like as fast as they can, just try and get whatever they can.
Yeah. No, that is very unhealthy and not sustainable, right? I mean, for people's
Definitely
well-being,
sustainable.
that's just not a recipe for health at all.
Yeah. Yeah. I was wondering, do you recommend people job hopping? Because I saw that people who tend to change jobs more frequently tend to get higher salaries. I don't know, maybe they can find the job that fits better, or maybe it's just some sort of like external validation.
Yeah. I mean, you're probably not asking the right person, because I have not job hopped in 30 years, and I could have, and I've had opportunities and considered it, but kind of like the stability and pretty happy with the job characteristics of my job. But the average Bureau of Labor Statistics says, the average person, the average job is 4.1 years. So job hoppers are actually moving faster than that. Some people are moving all the time. Some people are staying 30 years, and that average ends up being 4.1 per job. But even in academia, the way that you make more money is you publish a lot and you move. And if money is the driver, then that's what people do. And if you're a sole breadwinner, and you can live in the place that has the lowest cost of living and try and maximize your salary, those are definite strategies that people employ, and that can make sense. You're saying like the rat race, right? That's kind of a way around it. If everybody's going to North Dakota and there are a lot of job opportunities in North Dakota, but the cost of living is low, that's when you see a lot of people moving to North Dakota. But you've got to be willing to shift and move, relocate often, unless you're going to do that remotely. And so those are some of the trade-offs. People become quite embedded in their communities, right? And so that social fabric, I like walking in the neighborhood and seeing my neighbors and seeing the same people who walk their dogs at the same time. And I kind of like those sorts of things. again, to kind of just the happiness of my day around the work. And so those things matter to me, but I probably could be in another neighborhood and say hi to other people, right? And be happy. It's just about trade-offs, I think, personally. But clearly there, like if you're a person starting off or looking to start over, there are parts of the country that you can buy a much bigger house for less money than where I'm located in Oregon, or anywhere on the West Coast, really, or East Coast for that matter, right? So, Detroit is having a renaissance. So, there's an opportunity there. So it really depends on how much you're willing to be mobile and unembed yourself from where you are to take advantage of some of those things.
There's something to be gained, but there's a cost to moving around so much, a personal cost. So, yeah,
Yeah.
that makes sense. Yeah. On managers, I saw some statistic that most of the variance in engagement and retention is due to a manager. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, Gallup has the statistic that again and again that the manager is why people leave a job. And it kind of makes sense. There are probably job characteristics that a manager cannot overcome, but a manager can make unpalatable things much more palatable, and they can make your life a living hell. So I always ask students at the beginning of the term, tell me about the best job you ever had and the worst job you ever had, and really, it's always about the manager. I mean, occasionally
Okay.
it'll be the customers or some other aspect, but if somebody's just really a horrible human being, it's hard to want to go and see them every day and have them be in control of you at all.
Related to that, I heard on an episode of Freakonomics where they're talking about the Peter principle and just basically like some inherent thing in bad managers where people get promoted until they start doing not very good at their job. Like they're not so bad that they get fired, but they're just kind of like they get promoted until they're not going to be able to get promoted anymore. I was wondering, is that is that like a general principle, or is that something that companies can overcome? Is there like strategies? Is there something in the company that they can do to like cycle people around and kind of evaluate managers and see, really kind of if there's such a critical role in determining the workforce, production, and engagement, all these things, like is there a way that the managers can get evaluated and
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure there are in some organizations that cracked that code better than others. So at Google, they did a big stay. First, their hypothesis was we don't need managers, right? We don't need leaders. That's just a passe thing. So they tried that for a while. No, that wasn't really true. That didn't work for them too well. Then they did a study of what great leaders do. So it was qualitative and asking, and they came up with these different things you might, they're supportive and they communicate and they make time for you, and they're kind of the basic things. But then they took it a step further and started training all the managers, so rating and training, and it really just takes that level of kind of conscientious going through and doing that evaluation and training. And most organizations don't have the bandwidth, they don't see that as their big issue. But I think if you start hearing that the managers are a problem, then that starts to become more of a critical issue. But it's an unpleasant thing to tackle, right? I think organizations definitely could. I'm just not sure how often they get excited about the thought of investing a lot of time and energy and into potentially losing their jobs. So
yeah. Okay. Shift a little bit here. Talked a little bit about some macroeconomic things. Are there other maybe laws or macroeconomic considerations that you like or you think people should consider that you think would promote some of these things that we're talking about, the worker engagement and things like that? I know in Europe they have much stronger labor laws, for example, right? They have smaller work days, more time off, mandated time off, leave, things like that. How do those sort of laws, and if you have others, how do those affect the output, the workforce, the engagement, all the things we've been talking about?
I mean, they're different cultures, different countries, right? So, but in Norway, they have the work councils. So you really have the workers and the management working together. And it's not, I'm sure there are times when it is, but it's not seen as an adversarial. It's definitely seen as a partnership. So it's not like management is trying to do something and then they're getting caught. They would just always go to the council and try and understand how this would impact workers before they would propose anything. Like it's just a normal way that they operate, and so it's a very different level and kind of trust partnership that we don't have for sure. There were some other things you were talking about there. I mean, we've done some experiments kind of around the world, but in terms of the 4-day work week or working 30 hours or shorter work days. There are countries that outlaw asking anybody or emailing anybody outside of work hours, things to kind of protect workers' time. So, I mean, you're definitely really amazing worker abuses that go on every day. In every sector of the economy, there are people who have power over others and abuse that power. And so I think some of what we're talking about, we're talking about the good apples, right? When things are going well, how do we make it better? But there are some incredibly bad perspectives, bad abuses of power without a lot of checks and balances. So, that's kind of the ugly side of the capitalist society that we've designed or that we find ourselves in. And so there are inherent challenges to it. There are more and more, I guess, provisions over time to help protect people, but in general, a lot of it comes down to the one-on-one trust and the ecosystems that we find ourselves in. So I guess that would be one thing I would say to somebody. It's like, really, if you can't sleep at night, if your health is suffering, if your stress is amazingly great, what are your other options to consider, kind of getting out from those situations? Because it really is something that our psyche can be as bad as any kind of physical thing. I know the Surgeon General recently was talking about the loneliness epidemic, that kind of has surfaced around the world, but also in the US, and was saying that the health impacts of feeling lonely and disconnected are as bad as smoking 15 cigarettes a day on your health. And we haven't done those kind of quantifications before, really, where we're really talking about having a bad boss and what does that do to your health. And, so we think about, all these things as kind of unrelated when really they're directly related. So I think there's a lot of opportunities to think about laws or think about, for if these are publicly traded companies, as shareholders to kind of demand and customers to demand that workers are treated more fairly and humanely. And that goes, around the world for how things are manufactured and the kind of worker abuses there. But it's hard because we're all just trying to get through our day, right? And so where are those coalitions when we're taking stands for things? And that's a little bit of what I saw the Great Resignation doing, is just saying enough is enough about a lot of things. I don't want to work 80 hours anymore and be paid for 40. And, I don't want to deal with a boss who's a jerk. And I don't want to be told, that I'm not doing a good job all the time when I think I am, and those sorts of things. So enough is enough. But then, how do we make things better if we're not there? So I don't know what I'm saying exactly. I guess as an individual, you got to protect yourself. But then as collective individuals, we should be banding together and trying to make things better.
We need both, right? The shift in the culture needs to come not just from the individual, but from the collective as well. You should look to what we can do personally, but also what we should be striving for together.
And the irony is, the lower you go down the organization, the more those individuals know what needs to happen in the organization. They know what the issues are. As once you become a leader, people stop telling you the truth. They stop telling you everything. They withhold information, impression manage. So, really communication and talking to people throughout all levels of the organization is critical to a healthy culture for sure.
Yeah, so there's this meme that you see online a lot of this antagonistic relationship between the workers and the management, right? Where the management wants to pay you as little as they can to get as much work out of you, and the workers want to do as little work as can and get paid the most. And then you have managers that are on the side of the company, and then so I was just wondering, like, I know there's some ways you can have where the managers aren't accountable to the owners, the leadership, they're accountable to the workers, and I feel like just having systems like that can really change, like just change who you're accountable to can really affect the work culture and all these things that we've been talking about.
Yeah, and checks and balances, right? I mean, we see Glassdoor and those kind of ratings externally, but organizations doing that internally and acting upon it are things that can make a big difference as well. Using data to inform, how are we doing as management?
Oh, and you talked about the loneliness and I wanted to connect that to service jobs because I just know a lot of people don't even like necessarily being service. They like they like the automation. They like just tell the robot to do the thing and that's it. But doesn't seem to be the best thing for our humanity at the moment.
Yeah, and all the delivered foods and that sort of
Yeah.
thing. Yeah, it can lead to isolation. It's kind of like the remote work. We think we want it, but then, you're actually a little happier when you go out in the world, at least some of the time. But going out really 5, 6 days a week and having to go out 9 to 5, 8 to 4, that wasn't great for people either, probably everybody. So finding the right balance.
Let me start to wrap it up here. I'm curious who uses your research? Like who is interested? Where do you get funding?
Well, I guess it's kind of a cross section. I've been funded by the Society for HR Management. So SHRM has funded several of my applied studies. The National Science Foundation has funded some of my work. National Institutes of Health have funded some of my work. And so there's those kind of national organizations. HR consulting firms use my work. It shows up in textbooks, so it's taught in classrooms. NASA has used my onboarding work to kind of redesign their onboarding program. Microsoft, Google, those are examples of organizations that I've worked with directly. I try and make my work really translatable. So I think I choose pretty applied topics, and then I work pretty hard to translate them into ways that are going to be readily available for managers and organizations. And so, I'm hoping that as many people as possible are using it.
And then what do you think are some of the important problems, the important questions that people need to be researching in your field?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I mean, it's always the question. We get a lot of autonomy in what we can study. I think AI is opening up huge opportunities for things that we don't, really even know yet. But so it's hard to go beyond the descriptive. Right now, we're just trying to catch up and keep up. Looking at chatbots and what that means for recruitment and selection and those sorts of things is one thing I've been working with companies on. Loneliness is another one, trying to understand loneliness in terms of the outcomes at work, and then immediately pivoting to kind of that applied, what would be interventions. So how could we take people who are feeling more lonely, who are actually employed, and help them, to become more connected? Because as you said, sometimes we make choices that are counter to our best interests in some of that connection. So how can we make sure that it's still comfortable for people, but we're helping them to kind of make more of those or feel more connected? So that's the irony about loneliness, right? You can be in a room full of people and feel lonely, and I wouldn't know how you feel. It's a pretty interesting, important, but challenging problem to tackle.
Yeah, that's pretty good. Do you have anything else to add? Anything else you want to promote?
Being science-based, science-informed, is definitely something that I'm always advocating for, and kind of translating the best of our science. I mean, to the degree that my work is funded by NSF and NIH, you've paid for it, right, in some way through your tax dollars. And so kind of availing yourself to what's out there and what's been translated, I think is something that everybody would benefit from.
Mhm. Okay, good. Yeah, that's what I'm trying to do, I guess. Thanks.
Great. Well, thank you for being part of that translation vehicle.